Hey, it's Rick, aka Concrete River, the sweatiest flavor reviewer in the game. Um, so today I have some more concentrates from Super Concentrates. That's the brand name, at least on Bull City Flavors. I know they are sold as Vaping Zone flavors too on Vaping Zone. So I had some more reviews, some more requests for review on these. I knocked the fruits out a little bit earlier, and pretty, they were frustrating flavors. For the most part, they're very nice, thick, uh, syrupy candy flavors, very bright, very vibrant for like 3 days, and then they absolutely fall off a cliff. So I was interested to see what they did with some more savory flavors. I have two tobacco flavors. I have their Seven and their Cohiba, and then I have caramel candy and milk chocolate. So I'm going to give all these a shot. So when I say first test, again, kind of lying. These have been steeping for about 7 days by now, and I did go through and test them between 3 and 4 days to kind of get a benchmark to see if the flavors were fading out, and see kind of what they were doing with the steep. So this is a first slash second taste. It's going to be the first time that I'm going to be trying to give like some in-depth notes on them. All these are mixed at 3%. The last time I mixed up super concentrates, I mixed them at 2 and 4%. Found that I was leaning a little bit more towards the 4%, so I just went ahead and cut out the middleman, mixed them at 3%. So starting off, we are going to go with Seven. So this is called Seven on Bull City Flavors website for super concentrates. I'm also fairly sure it's the same thing as Seven Stars on Vaping Zone. The only thing that I know definitively about this is it's apparently a tobacco flavor. We've established that much. But there's not a whole lot of documentation about like what kind of tobacco this is supposed to taste like. And honestly, my vocabulary with tobacco isn't fantastic. So I'm just going to treat it like another flavor. I'm not going to be able to go ahead and break down all of like the cigar nerd, like top note wrapper stuff. It's just going to be me tasting a couple of tobacco flavors and telling you what I think. So, without further ado, Super Concentrate 7 at 3%. So, right off the bat, it reminds me of TFA's Western, actually. It has that kind of cigarette paper, like the actual paper wrapping on a cigarette kind of vibe to it. Like you taste, I don't even want to say it's burning so much. It sort of tastes like a warm cigarette smells without the actual ash note. I'm not getting too much in the way of ash. It doesn't really feel like a particularly dirty flavor. It feels more papery than anything else. There is some sort of sweeter tobacco leaf flavor in there. It's sort of dry. And again, I hate to keep using the same word, but it does have that kind of like dry, papery mouthfeel to it. But there is a little bit of tobacco in there. So the sort of accent notes for this are really interesting. Beyond just that sort of cigarette paper taste, I'm getting some chocolate in there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. A lot of good tobaccos have like kind of a chocolatey accent to it. Almost like a Swiss Miss cocoa chocolate, not really like a dark cocoa. It's not overwhelming, and it kind of works well with that cigarette paper vibe. Uh, You do kind of run into some issues with the carrier though. So ethyl alcohol, at least I found, the flavors that are carried in ethyl alcohol tends to add a little bit of like a fruitiness to the flavors, which is almost imperceptible when you're talking about flavors that are supposed to taste like fruit. But when you bring in like a more savory profile, like a tobacco, like a darker candy, that fruitiness gets a little bit distracting. And I'm definitely getting some of that fruitiness there. It almost has like a little bit of like a citrus burst to it. And I'd be inclined to say that that's because of the ethyl alcohol base, or at least something in that's kind of tweaking it and pushing it up a little bit. It also seems to have just a little bit of like a floral note. And it's not heavy. It's not heavy and it's not really flowery, but it seems to have almost like a little bit of like dryer sheet, that kind of like artificial floral note to it. At 7 days, it's died down quite a bit from where it was at 3 days. But the trade-off with that is this flavor is kind of doing the same thing that the fruits were doing, where it's a lot less vibrant. Sort of a darker, muddier flavor. It seems to be steeping in the wrong direction. Instead of coming together, it seems like it's just kind of fading out. And that's actually a really big problem when you're talking about tobacco recipes. For a lot of people, tobacco recipes end up being fairly long steeping recipes. A lot of the accents that you see in tobacco recipes, like nuts and chocolate and custard and like breadier flavors, tend to need that longer steep to really come together. So if you're using a tobacco concentrate that works better fresh with a bunch of flavors that are going to need 2-3 weeks to steep together, you're going to lose a lot of that tobacco note. So you either end up like over flavoring like crazy, or you end up with, a custard with some light tobacco notes and your balance is all sorts of off. This isn't a bad flavor though. I actually kind of dig it, but I kind of dig TFA's Western too. The problem would be mixing with it. So like I said, you've got some issues with the flavor sticking around, so you're really limited in your mixers. This doesn't really feel like it needs any like fruit accents to it. It doesn't have the kind of like depth and richness that would really carry off like your usual tobacco fruit accents like fig or cherry or like dark berries. I don't think it's really going to stand up to that and really come together and cohere. I think if you wanted to go, and again, it sounds a little crazy, follow me here, but if you wanted to really play up that citrus thing and wanted to mix tobacco with citrus, this is not a bad idea. Citrus has a hellacious throat hit though, so you're already going to be adding something with some ethyl maltol or something to make it vapable quickly. So you're going to run into some balancing issues, and you're also going to run into the flavoring basically the juice falling flat on its face about a week out. As it stands though, if I was really crunched for time and really wanted a tobacco flavor that was a little bit lighter, I would definitely mix this up as a solo flavor. So next on the tobacco train, after some palate cleansing, brought to you by the fine folks at Shasta, we have Cohiba. So I do know enough about tobaccos to that Cohiba is something involving cigars. So like I would say probably the majority of people vaping. I'm an ex-smoker. It's a little hard for me to review tobaccos, mostly because while, I certainly eat enough in general, I have a good basis of comparison. I was never really a fancy tobacco smoker. I had my brand and I smoked that basically. Didn't really go outside the box, get into cigars and all that other stuff. So I have to approach this from sort of like a fundamental level, sort of describing the flavor as opposed to sort of likening it to other types and kinds of tobaccos. But I'll do what I can. We have Cohiba at 3%, steeped for 7 days. Okay, so right off the bat, what I'm noticing is that a lot of the off notes for this are really similar to the off notes for 7 which makes me think that it really is just kind of that problem with the base. I'm getting something that feels a little bit citrusy and bright in there. I'm also getting that same kind of like weird floral edge to it. This is kind of nutty overall, which is nice. I like that kind of nutty accent flavor in tobaccos, like Flavora's Red Burley. I love the nutty note in there, and this is kind of reminding me of that. This isn't quite as intense as Red Burley, but the nutty note seems really well balanced with what's going on. I'm not getting any kind of ash note on it. Nothing like green or leafy about it. It's a relatively dry, like cigar wrapper flavor. You aren't getting like a whole bunch of that dirty, rich stuff inside. It's just like smelling a cigar more than actually vaping it. It feels a little bit reductive to just call this nice, but it's nice. It's well balanced. The nuttiness works with what little bit of that drier tobacco that you're getting. Um, those weird citrusy floral off notes aren't really interfering with anything all that bad. It's not particularly harsh. Um, it actually feels a little bit cooler than I think it should. But yeah, it's definitely not a bad flavor, and I could definitely see soloing this if you were sort of pressed for time when you start mixing it with other things. Like you want to play up that nutty character, you're going to run into steeping issues. You want to play up any part of this, you want to add like a richer tobacco from somebody like Inawera. Those tend to need close to a month to steep, and so it's not the they're not going to be ready at the same time, basically. You want to get to this when it's a little bit fresher, and you want to let those sit. What you might be able to do with this is sort of use it for sort of that binder note, or like a wrapper note for like a Favora tobacco that's a little bit more full bodied, but those also work really well with short steeps. So you should be able to like generate a fairly satisfying like cigar type vape without having to steep it for a month. You know, if you want to mix a smaller bottle of something, burn through it in a couple days, this is not a bad concentrate to look for that sort of drier cigar wrapper. Uh, in terms of flavor fading, so trying this at 3 days, it does feel like it's faded out quite a bit. It's a little bit less rich at 7 days. Um, I think it's about the same level of nutty, which is good, but it doesn't quite have the same presence, the same kick that it did at 3 days, which is why I'd probably suggest accenting it with one of the Flavora tobaccos. Uh, there's not a lot to really be mad at this flavor for, besides those weird ethyl alcohol off notes, but it's largely solid. I mean, if this is your thing, you could definitely do worse, and you don't want to wait around for something to steep. So, okay, so moving on from the tobaccos, we're going to move into the candies, basically. And this is where you lose out on my first reaction to Super Concentrate's caramel candy, because I was absolutely mystified. So we'll try to recreate some of that magic here. They say caramel candy. This tastes nothing like caramel candy. Ethyl alcohol off notes still in here, and a whole lot weirder with this flavor as opposed to the tobaccos, which is kind of an accomplishment. Um, so the base flavor itself tastes more like almost burnt popcorn. There's generally like two schools in the caramel concentrate world. There's like Flavora and Flavor Art, which are kind of dry caramelized sugar, and then there's something like Capella's caramel, or the Flavor West caramels, that are sort of heavy, and they tend to get a little bit cardboardy, but they do have a pretty good butter note. This does neither well, actually. Um, I'm going to go for almost burnt popcorn mixed with like some of the weirdness that you get off coffee flavors. It's not really satisfying and it's not really sweet either. It doesn't really bring to mind any kind of caramel, let alone like what I'd think like a chewier caramel candy would be. Yeah, that alpha alcohol like gives it kind of like a sort of overripe banana note to it. Like the fruitiness is not working with the base flavor here. So the good news, there's less of this flavor at 7 days than there was at 3 days. So there are some times when you want something to steep out. Those cases you probably shouldn't actually be using the flavor to start with, but it's really hard to recommend. I can't really think of someplace that I actually kind of want that flavor. Like you don't want that almost burnt popcorn taste anywhere near most of your juices. I mean, if you want to get really specific and trying to make some popcorn ball kind of creation with some TFA kettle corn or something, and you need to bring in like a sort of authentic overdone popcorn note on top of like Cyril 27 or something, uh, there might be some really specialized niche cases, but it's not really something that I would worry about picking up or something that I want to spend a lot of time vaping. So, last and dare I say most relevant to what people are actually looking for, I have their milk chocolate. So there was that entire kerfuffle about Inaware's milk chocolate being reformulated, tasting like Band-Aids, and then Flavora's milk chocolate I actually like quite a bit, but it is ridiculously strong and it still doesn't really capture like the richness of like a good milk chocolate. Um, so I was hoping if anything was going to click out of this batch, it was going to be the milk chocolate. Give it a shot. So like the caramel candy, it doesn't really have any kind of richness to it. It doesn't have like a dairy richness or anything that really makes you want to vape it. On the bright side, though, the flavor around it is quite a bit better than the flavor in caramel candy. What this sort of reminds me of more than anything else is like smelling powdered cocoa mix with like little marshmallows and stuff. It's on the drier side. Doesn't really have a full mouth feel. It's not a bad chocolate note in so much that there's nothing actively offensive about it. It doesn't taste like really plasticky or rancid or anything, but it's kind of unsatisfying. And I think there's probably better ways to go about your chocolates. This doesn't really seem like it's worth a lot of time. The odd fruity note in this isn't as aggressive as it is in the caramel candy. It doesn't have that kind of rotten banana thing. It's just like a weird kind of watery, slightly tart fruitiness that doesn't really belong with the chocolate. Um, and it doesn't steep well, too, which, again, common theme. Uh, I can't really figure out a good use for this. I mean, there are better ways to go about dark chocolate, and there's better ways to go about milk chocolate, too. This doesn't really tick any of those boxes for me. There's nothing wrong with it in terms of the actual flavor. It's not a bad flavor. It just doesn't really seem like a satisfying chocolate vape, which I realize is a bit of an oxymoron at this point. But you might be able to punch it up with some acetylpyrazine or something. But with the way that chocolate's fading out, and it's pretty dramatic from 3 to 7 days. If you like try to punch it up with like acetylpyrazine or anything like that, this is gonna fade out, and instead you're gonna be left with mildly chocolate flavored like corn chips, which isn't anything that anybody really wants to vape. Um, so everybody likes baseless blanket statements, right? Flavor Express from e-cig Express, and then super concentrates from Bull City Flavors, Vaping Zone, whatever. The problem with these, I don't think, is that they're, Chinese flavor, because a lot of the hangs and stuff works really well, and that's all Chinese. I just don't like ethyl alcohol as a carrier, especially for anything that's supposed to be darker or more savory. It just has some real issues with fading out. And it's really hard to do much with these except for like solo flavor them and vape them in a couple of days. You're not going to be able to build the kind of like rich, complex mixes that you want to build when you can't count on one of these flavors sticking around past a certain amount of time. So as tempting as they are sort of on just straight off the shake, which, these I could take or leave, but they do have some really awesome fruit flavors. It just is a profoundly unsatisfying experience actually trying to mix with them. So I don't know. I'm going to go skip on ethyl alcohol based flavors. They just don't really do it for me. But, they're not bad flavors. There's something about the construction that just doesn't really agree with me. But thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I will catch you later.